podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Hello everyone, I'm Chris Wynn and welcome to How We're the Podcast. And as the games are coming thick and fast, so are the podcasts. And we have another belter for you today, as we have a very special guest with us to talk all things, I suppose, historical, regional sports journalism and more, and all things Sunderland as well. But first of all, we have a familiar voice from Down Under, which is, of course, Martin Wanless. Hello, Martin.
I thought you were giving us a good build-up there, like Chris. You were in danger of overselling me there.
Well, that's right. I put in there. But first of all, and then we'll get back to presenting our proper guest. You know what I mean?
I know. But no, it's very nice to be back on.
Yeah, how's it going? Because we are in the midst of reacting to the Norwich game. So I'm just wondering if you had a nice long sleep during that.
Well, the alarm went off at, I think, 4:15 this morning to get me out of bed to watch that. So it didn't really set me up for a very exciting day, I have to say. But it's, it's the trials and tribulations that come from living 16,000 kilometres from the Stadium of Light. So it's what you've got to do.
Well, you've got to pay a price for all that sunshine.
You do.
That's it. Well, everyone knows we always like someone who knows their stuff to put us right on How We're the Podcast. So to discuss all things Sunderland, we have a legend of sports presenting in the North East who is now branching out into everything from interviews on BBC Sounds to having his very own stage show performed at venues across the North East this summer. We are, of course, joined by none other than Jeff Brown. Hello, Jeff.
Hi, Chris. Thank you very much for that build-up. Not even a legend in my own house, I would say.
Well, you say, because I knew I was going to be introducing Martin, I was, I actually missed a lot out because I was going to put, 40 years of journalism and, writing for the Journal and turning down Fleet Street and all this, which I'm sure we'll get into. But I mean, just to start with, how are you keeping? Because obviously, it's been it's been about a year since you've kind of gone off our screens regularly?
Yes, left at the end of May last year. It was something I've been thinking about for a while. It was just the time was right. I reached 63 last summer and I'd worked 42 years, so that's like 2/3 of my life. And I've been 21 years at the BBC, so that was like a third of my life and half my working life. And it just seemed a nice sort of symmetry, and I wanted to quit while I was ahead before they were saying, God, they're going to get rid of this old guy. He's been there forever. We need to get him shifted somehow. And it was, I wanted to leave when, touch wood, I've still got enough time and health-wise to do other things. And it's, I do actually, the season was only about a week old and Look North rang and said, we're really struggling on a Monday to put the team talk slot together. Can you come back? So I do actually go in on a Monday morning. I do a half day, edit all the pictures because people say, what do you do all day? You just read the news. Well, physically, I'm an editor as well. So I edit a lot of the packages for the right scripts. And then the best bit is it comes to lunchtime and I just turn to Dawn and Alistair and the rest and say, right, see ya. I'm going home now. And haven't regretted it.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, I mean, over 40 years, I mean, but it must feel different that kind of you're not in it, on a daily basis, you're not seeing what's going on. But so how does it feel not to be kind of under that pressure of dealing with the next story?
Yeah, it's quite good, actually. I arrived in the pub to watch the game last night and one or two people were saying, what's happened with Mundell? What's that? And I said, hey, I'm not in it anymore. You probably know more than me. I am obviously interested, but yeah, it is quite a relief not to have to be on it so much. And of course, over the years with social media, it just the pressure of trying to be first with the news or trying to know what's happening. Just grew and grew, and when I started, newspapers were the main way of finding out information, and they came out. You got the evening paper and the morning paper the next day, and then you had to wait another day to find out what was happening. So, yeah, the whole nature of journalism's changed, and it was a good time. I think everyone thinks they always had the best times. I'm sure I did. Yeah.
Well, you see, you've already blown a question I had. That I was going to ask you. Did you kind of report in the golden age? So,
yeah, I think I probably did, or even the age before. I mean, in the 60s, you know, I talked to older journalists like Doug Weatherall, still going at 92, still going to Sunderland games, which is great, and they were in even closer contact with players. My era, which was the sort of 80s onwards, I dig out my old contacts book, and I've got all the players' home numbers. And you know, we used to they drove slightly better cars, had slightly bigger houses, and slightly more glamorous wives. But basically, they were the same as you and me. You know, they were ordinary blokes. And then when, I mean, we travelled with them. I'm sure I've told you this before. In the 80s, under Denis Smith, we travelled on the team bus for a few seasons, which was great. And you got to know the players, and the lads from that era, like Gary Bennett, Dickie Ord, Gabbers, Kevin Ball, I would consider mates, because I just, you know, I got to know them. 92, it all changed when the Premier League came in and clubs started appointing press officers, and instead of just turning up at the training ground and grabbing whoever you wanted to for a chat, suddenly you had to be there at a certain time, and you were given 5 minutes with whoever. And it's changed a lot. Funnily enough, just last week, the club decided to make a change. So for the last, I don't know how many years, since Sunderland dropped out the Premier League, I've been taking a camera to the game, and because I'm trained to be a video journalist as well. So I set the camera up in the press room, and the format has been Nick Barnes comes in, interviews the head coach. I film it. Simon from Tyne T, Simon O'Rourke, does the same. He films it. Barnsley finishes. We get the chance to throw in a few questions, and then it's open to the press lads, the rest of the floor. We film the whole lot. Just last week, the club decided that with the Premier League in mind, should it happen this season, fingers crossed, or even next season, they've got to prepare for the Premier League. So now, from last week, Nick was in a separate radio room, which was the old ones he used to use in the Premier League days, just inside the tunnel. I was in a separate TV interview room, and we started getting, not only do you get Régis Lebris on your own for a 2-minute one-to-one chat, but they're bringing players in as well, because they want to get the players more used to dealing with the media, because they just haven't really been put up for interview much over the last few years. And of course, the Premier League, you're duty bound to put somebody up for interview after the games. So for the last game, the Millwall game, I got to speak to Chris Mepham, who I've never spoken to before in my life, and he was a really nice guy. Very so things are going back to the way they used to be on the interview front.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, Martin, just to kind of bring you into it, because I was going to say you're about the same age, which I thought you were before we started this pod, but I've established you quite a bit older.
Oh,
but
a couple of years.
We're from the same kind of era, let's say. Going back to that local journalism, and we mentioned it to Ian Murter when we spoke to him. Like, we've got Jeff on now. We spoke to Ian Murter. Jeff mentioned Doug Weatherall, and this, you could rattle off all the names, the huge names that we kind of grew up with reading and seeing on the TV as well. And I'd say, in terms of the regional TV and regional journalism, that's kind of gone out the window, where you haven't got those big kind of names where, that they're huge, kind of almost people in Fleet Street know them, and they're kind of huge figures.
Well, that's right. I think, as Jeff was saying there, it was a golden era in sports reporting. We do the On This Day feature for the website every day, and you're trawling through the archives, and you can see a marked difference towards the end of the 70s in terms of the volume of sports stories in the back of the paper. And through the early 80s, that grew and probably stayed, pretty substantial and consistent through the 80s and 90s. And of course, you had the Sunderland Echo coming out. You had the Football Pink. You had the Pink out of Newcastle. You had the Journal, you had the Evening Chronicle, Northern Echo. You had all of these papers who were vying for local competition as well. So you had no other, social media wasn't around. You weren't going to have stories on there. The newspapers, the local newspapers, were the place to get any information from. We used to get the Northern Echo delivered through the door, because I lived in Black Hill near Concert, so you couldn't get the Sunderland Echo. Get the Journal, got the Evening Chronicle delivered on night time. But I used to run into the newsagents after getting off the school bus to look on the back of the Chronicle, probably to read stories of, it was obviously you had to dig for the Sunderland things out of the Newcastle stuff, but see if we were linked with somebody, see if we'd signed somebody. And, I remember there was weeks on end. This is a complete sort of little niche thing, but before we signed Tony Norman, we were linked with Peter Fox from Stoke for months. Denis Smith must have had a connection with him from Stoke. We were desperate for him. And I used to come down, get the paper off the doormat on the morning and pray that it would say Fox signed, or Smith lands Fox, or Fox. And every morning I was disappointed. So, you got that was the only way of actually getting, obviously the radio was there. There'd be a little bit on the radio. There was little bits on the television. But even watching the goals and catching the match action, there were very few matches were broadcast live. So, you used to go to all the home games. You might get to see one or two away games on the TV a season if you were lucky. We used to go to maybe 5 or 6 away games during the course of the season. So it was always the Sunday night or the Monday night news broadcasts. And I think TNT's had the rights for football for a long time during the sort of late 80s, early 90s. So I was sat there with a video recorder, ready to press record when Sunderland came on. And I actually had 3 full seasons worth of recorded highlights off the TNT's news, and you get little clips of Mike Neville or Duncan Wood or whoever it is either side of it. But it's such a different world now in terms of I guess not even as a consumer of that stuff, but actually going to find that stuff, because essentially everybody in the world has got access to the world's audience. So you can post something on a forum, post something on social media, and all of a sudden anybody in the world can see it. You haven't got an audience that's yours, and it's such a difficult thing. I think you kind of see that, and obviously there's still some very good football writers and journals out there, but there are more football writers than journalists. The writing about football rather than finding stories to break, because it's such a hard thing to actually break stories, and it gets on my nerves. You see some of the local stuff, and not wishing to disparage anything, but you see, we played Football Manager, and this is who Sunderland are going to sign and stuff. It's like, Jesus Christ, if we really got to that level. There was one the other day, I asked AI who Sunderland should sign in the summer. It's like, is that where we've got to?
It's getting harder to because you've got less and less access to people to the players and the people inside. Yeah. That journalists who are working on newspapers have still got that physical space to fill. So you end up with a lot of comment pieces, or a lot of, here's something I found on a website somewhere. And it's just changed. The whole nature of it's changed. I say, in my day, I had all the home numbers, and you didn't have to ask anyone for permission. You just ring them up and say, what about the game on Saturday? What do you think about this? And so you had, And the other annoying thing that I find about newspapers is that certainly the nationals aren't interested at all in anything outside the Premier League.
No.
Even the quality papers, I get the Observer on a weekend, and if you ever have a match report on a championship game, then it's a rarity. It's just like a little column, as if nothing exists, and obviously lower down, forget about it.
Yeah. And so, sorry, I just like to go back to your comment about the cars, Jeff, because my memory is of them getting presented with Yugos or old Citroens with their name across the side.
It was always funny whenever you went to Newcastle or the Metro Centre. The rivalry was different back in the late 80s. It's not the same as it is now at all. So I used to go to the Metro Centre, and Kevin Ball drives wherever it is. He'd be parked up in the yellow car park at the Metro Centre, going to Marks and Spencer's or wherever it is. You couldn't imagine Luke O'Nien parking his car in in the middle of Newcastle now, you wouldn't find it in the same state as you left it, would you?
With his name right across the side of it as well. But yeah, but I mean, it is a sad thing though, Jeff, because as Martin said, I mean, the amount of times we've doing the on this day pieces on the site, which we have to churn out every day. So it's got to a point now we're on our 5th round, I think, something like that, 4th or 5th round of doing them.
Probably more.
So probably more. So when you're doing by now we've done all the big games pretty much from every single day. So we dive in and quite often we see pieces from you, as Martin just said, linked with Peter Fox, but stories like this, and we put out, and those are the ones we're pulling out as saying that's a story for Sunderland on this day. But that's surely going to die out.
Yeah, yes. It's, and that, can you imagine what that was like, turning up for work every day thinking, I have got this physical space to fill. So, yeah, sometimes you did come out with some rubbish or stuff that you think, yeah, I'm not really sure about this, but I think I'll probably just about get away with it. I remember once at Newcastle, I was in the office on a Sunday and I had to come up with a story for the Monday, and Bob Cass had a story in the Mail on Sunday about Newcastle trying to sign some players from Chelsea, and I tried ringing Bob just to confirm it, and he didn't reply. So I just lifted it and I put it in the journal the next day. Went down to Newcastle's training ground, and Willie McFall so he came out when he stormed out of his office. He had a copy of the journal. He just scrunched it up and said, "Absolute crap," and threw it at me. Threw the rolled up newspaper at me. So yeah, you would get that occasionally. But I like to think there was more than a grain of truth in anything I ever wrote. I would never knowingly just fill a back page with something that wasn't true.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Willie McFall there, and you started off, I mean, in Sunderland terms in the days of Lawrie McMenemy. And but you look at football now and you look at characters in the game. And again, I mean, I'm probably sounding like an old fella saying, you're losing the characters. But, a lot of it is, as you say, players have been trained to be in front of the media. People they don't necessarily speak their mind. They're sometimes, there's been cases where people have been knocked out, or they've got through the next round of the cup, and they're in front of a camera saying, "Oh, it's a great 3 points," just because they're so programmed into what they're saying. But I mean, in terms of those characters, I mean, for you as a journalist to deal with those characters where there was no kind of press secretary or press officer, you just had to go up to these people and talk to them.
Yeah, it was Lawrie was certainly intimidating because he was a big character, and physically he was a big bloke. Remember, he's a guardsman, I think, at one stage. Yeah. He was, and I was 24, and we'd turn up to Roker Park, and you'd go upstairs into the lounge, and you'd just sit in a circle of chairs. And not only Lawrie, you talked about the big journalist. So I was in awe of my colleagues. So I was sitting there with Doug Weatherall, Bob Cass, Tony Hardesty from the Sunday Express, Colin Dieball from the Mirror, John Donoghue from the Express. People that I'd grown up reading, and I devoured newspapers because it was all I ever wanted to do. So I was sitting with them, and then Lawrie, who was, was having a hard time and hadn't expected it to turn out like this, and was getting a lot of stick from journalists that he had considered friends whenever we'd come up with Southampton, or whenever they'd gone down there, and it was the genial Geordie giant, Lawrie McMenemy, all this stuff. So yeah, it was a difficult baptism, but yeah, and at times it got to the stage where I really didn't like dealing with Lawrie at all, and there were times when the game started, and actually I want Sunderland to lose just because of Lawrie, and I'm thinking, no, this isn't right. And the day he left, if you remember the story, he sacked Lou Chatterley. Lou Chatterley left and brought in Chris, his son, and I rang Roker Park, and about the 10th time I ringing, I finally got through to Lawrie and asked him about it all, about Chris coming in. And my last words to him, the last words I ever spoke to him, I said, Lou Chatley's gone, Lawrie, but we can assume you'll still be here at the end of the season. And he said, I think you've got enough there, Bunny lad. And he put the phone down. So I wrote this story, and the headline I remember was McMenemy and Son. I didn't write the headline. So the journalists never write. They don't blame them for the headline. Sub-editor. And of course, then when my paper came out the next day, like every other paper, had the story about Chris McMenemy coming in. Apart from the Sun, to which he'd sold his story that he was leaving the club, and he didn't even tell the club. He did a midnight flit, cleared his house, went off to Florida, and then the next night on the Tyne-Tees News, a guy called Alistair Harrison, an old reporter, was doing this report about McMenemy's shock exit. And he said, and he even told this reporter, and he held up the back page of the Journal, he even told this reporter, I said, no, don't show everyone I got it wrong. It's terrible. Dear.
Yeah, but I mean, you've already mentioned, what came next in terms of Denis Smith, and it sounds, you've already said you were on the coach, and everything just sounded different. But he seemed to kind of get it, and I read in his book that when he came from York City, he got a huge shock that, to that step up from York to Sunderland, where I think York, he might have done one press conference a week. At Sunderland, he was expected to do one every morning, one every afternoon. Yeah. And then he basically had this big press corps that he had to deal with.
Yeah, yes, I think that part of it certainly was the volume was a shock. He'd had some dealings with a radio station in York. I can't remember what it was, but he was very switched on. Dennis was, and obviously had Viv alongside him, who could talk for England. Who, God bless him, was an absolute diamond to work with as well. And Bob Murray was the chairman. Bob, when he took over as chairman, rang the Journal desk and said, I've just taken over as chairman of Sunderland Football Club. Would you like to interview me? I mean, come on. Who's going to do that these days? Yeah. I've never, don't get me started on Kyril. I've never, have I spoken to him? Twice, I think. Never done an interview. I did an event with him about 18 months after he joined, because he took over during COVID. And the club said, we're going to do this welcome to Sunderland event for Kyril, and all top businessmen, MPs, council leaders, the mayor, everyone's going to be there. Would you host it? And I said, yeah, of course I will. So I sat down with him, and I'm going through the running order about a week before, and I said, yeah, that's great. That's great. Got to the end, and I said, where's the Q&A with Kyril? They said, oh, he's not saying anything. I said, no, come on, it's his event. He's got to say something. No, he's not saying anything. On the night, even when he got awarded, he got presented with the mayor. I got the mayor to come on stage, and the mayor said, thanks very much, everything you've done for the club. Presented him with a painting and a sculpture, I think, and he just took them and sat down. Didn't even say, thanks very much, everyone. It's been lovely. What a great night. Weird. I don't get him, to be honest. And he can do it's his club. He can do what he likes, but I find it very odd that he is so distant and doesn't give any interviews. And once when they launched the Sunderland story, the player that's on at the Come Back to the Empire soon, when they launched that, he was there and he talked to the press guys and to Nick Barnes for radio, but wouldn't do any TV. Wouldn't go on TV. Very odd. But hey, there you go.
But what in terms of Sunderland, and I'm going back to probably Bob Murray calling us the community club or something we were called back. I can't remember what it was now in the early 90s he called us. But
Caring Club.
The Caring Club, that was it. I knew it was something like that. Yeah, all over the programmes for 10 years, I think it was. But, going back to that, but, to be fair, you do look at Bob Murray and people can point at his faults, how he dealt with the footballing side. But, with the foundation and how he always kind of stepped up to the plate when things were bad or when things were good. I mean, it sounds like, it's a complete opposite that, yes, okay, that approach is fantastic when it's going great. But if it starts to go the wrong way, then how's that going to play out?
Yeah, but Bob, I've got a lot of time for Bob. He did, he built the stadium, he built the foundation, he took the club to heights that I'm not sure I'll see again in my lifetime, to be honest. I do remember saying to my pals around about the time of the 2 7th place finishes, enjoy this, might not be as good ever again. I'll keep my fingers crossed, but you never know. And he moved into an era where the single local owner, which was historically the way football clubs had been financed, it was just changing. Steve Gibson still does it. I don't know how. Great, full of praise for the way Steve Gibson does it at Middlesbrough. But it just went into the era where one guy on his own was never going to be able to finance it. And but Bob was great. Yeah, Bob was great for the club, and I've always got a lot of time for him.
Yeah. But just going back to you kind of traveling with the team on the coach, because you were saying they were all ended up being your mates. Now, so how did that play out when they got thumped 5-0, or that something happened, or there was a fallout or something? Because you were basically then kind of reporting on your mates, and then you'd have to get back on the coach the next week. Yeah,
but I think you developed. Maybe you didn't go quite so hard in on them, but I think they knew when they hadn't had a good game. I mean, the one saving grace for me was that we didn't do match marks. I think the journal probably only did it for one season, and that was what bothered players more than anything. Seriously, you could write anything you like, but match marks were the things they hated. And the Northern Echo used to do it a lot. Frank Johnson, who was a legendary reporter on the Echo, had a I don't know why, but him and Eric Gates didn't get on, and he always used to mark Gatesy down. And one day Gatesy said to him, why do I always get low marks? And he said, well, Eric, everybody else starts with 6 and goes upwards. You start with 4 and go down. But it was good. The only time I had one run in, I hope I've got time for this story. So Sunderland played away at Wimbledon, and Dickie Ord had a clash with John Fashanu in the first sort of minute, and I saw something had gone on. So afterwards on the bus, I said, "What was all that about, Ordy?" And he said, he cut me head with a clash of heads. He said he rubbed his fingers in the cut and licked it and said, "I love the taste of white man's blood." And Ordy said he was shaking, and I thought, oh, what a good story. But I buried it in my match report. But I made the mistake on the train on the way back of mentioning it to a mate of mine who worked for the Daily Mirror, who put it all over the back page of the Daily Mirror. John Fashanu with fangs and Dracula's wings on him, and a couple of days later we playing away at Bristol City, and was in the hotel after the match. It was the one where they won 6-1, and in the Elite Cup tie, and Borley says, "Hey, I want a word with you," and had me up against the wall. And he said, "How much did you make selling that story to the Daily Mirror?" And I said, I promised, Bob, I didn't make it. Come on, you must have made hundreds. Ordy wants a cut of that. I said, look, seriously, I just happened to mention it to me, mate. I didn't know he was going to put it all over the back page. And if you've ever shaken hands with Borley or you'll know he's got a bit of a grip, but yeah, he eventually let me go.
I mean, I don't know about you, Martin, but I mean, we've heard Ian Murter and Jeff talk about it. It's probably the reason I'm doing kind of this and writing for Roker Report. That was kind of the dream job as I was growing up.
Oh, mate, that's all I wanted to do. I even went to university to do it, but just it never worked out the way that you want. I think, I was going to say people of our age, people of my age and people of your age, Chris, as we've established. Thank you very much. But I think it was, if you couldn't play football, then that was the next best thing, as far as I was concerned when you're growing up, because you're reading stories. We've mentioned all of them: Frank Johnson, Jeff, all of the Jeff Story, all of the reporters that we read. We just wanted to be in that press box, writing about it. What a great job. And the interesting thing, I guess, from your experience, Jeff, there must have been a number of things that you knew about, and you thought, "There's absolutely no way I can run that story because that'll finish me with that player or this thing or whatever." So that relationship must have been kind of a delicate balance at times.
You always had that in mind, that and because you would occasionally get this from fans who come up and say, "Why didn't you say that they were rubbish on Saturday? Why didn't you?" And you said, "Well, I did, because you've got to go back and face these people, the next week." So maybe you would try and temper it slightly. But that's just the nature of any relationship you have with people. You try to be truthful, you try to be honest, sometimes it doesn't happen like that.
Well, just because you mentioned front page and you mentioned the League Cup, the one that springs to mind is Exeter City.
I didn't. I wasn't down on that one. That was one of the.
I don't think any journalist ever was, but I think there's probably a few down there.
Yes, was that the jumping on the cars after? Yeah. I do remember that.
I think they brought a couple of players.
Was it John Kay?
Yeah, I think a few players didn't get back on the coach, did they?
Yeah, Casey, what a lovely guy. I bumped into him in, where was it? Costco, I think it was, about 2 or 3 years ago, and I hadn't seen him literally for about 20 years, and he gave me the biggest hug. He just a genuinely nice guy,
I'm not sure what wingers of that era would be saying that. And he said, I think Denis Smith said in his book that he would stand on the touchline and just listen to John Kay talking to the winger for 90 minutes. I don't think he could repeat what he was saying, man. But
Denis and I had a bit of a love-hate relationship because the first thing I said to him when I met him, with him being from York City, I said, "Oh, I was at York University." Well, I didn't realise that he obviously thought, "Who's this kid? University? Who's it?" Denis was a working class Tory who, I pulled myself up by my bootstraps. I'm as good as anybody, and he was of the, what have you ever done? Who have you ever played for? I played first division. His famous, what he used to tell us regularly was that he taught Dave Watson how to play centre half when he went to Stoke, and we all went, "Yeah, Denis, yeah." How many England caps did Dave Watson win? How many did you win? But he always used to say, "Brownie," snidey little remark right at the end, because I'd always make little cutting comments when I could. So we had our battles, but actually, and when he came back, when he launched his autobiography, he had it was at the club shop. It's about 10 years ago, and I went along to do an interview, and he wrote. I got him to sign it, and he put in something like, "How are you still in journalism?" But then I saw him last season when Stoke came, and obviously he's knocking on a bit now, and it was great. I had I had a lovely chat with him, and pals again.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, we recently talked to Ian Murter, and we talked about the 90s when it came to Northeast football. I mean, when you think about it, how the top three clubs went into that decade, and then you had Keegan at Newcastle, you had Brian Robson at Middlesbrough, you had obviously Peter Reid at Sunderland. Mm-hmm. Middlesbrough, Sunderland got new stadiums, brand spanking new stadiums. Newcastle virtually got a new stadium. St James's Park was dropping the bits at the start of the 90s, and look at where it was at the end. But I mean, for that decade, to be reporting on those huge changes, because when people look back at stories of, so if in 30 years' time, 50 years' time, someone looks back and says, "Oh, I'm going to do a piece about Sunderland moving from Roker Park to Stadium of Light," they'll be looking at things like you did. They'll be looking at clips. They'll be looking at, so to report on that historical decade for all three clubs must have been something that actually you'll look back on and think, "God, I reported on that people are going to be reading what I wrote and watching me talk about it."
Yeah, yes, you sort of knew you were certainly with the grounds. The new, with the end of Ayresome Park and the end of Roker Park, you realised you were there watching history being made and being part of it. And they were great years. They were great years. And great characters. You know, Kevin Keegan was an absolute dream to work with. And as was Robbo. Brian Robson was a super guy, and Reedy was just and still is, you know, a terrific character whenever you meet him. I remember I was there for Tyne Tees watching the Fulwell end being pulled down, and yeah. I took a chunk of Roker end away with me, so I've got that upstairs in the loft. There were fantastic times to be a reporter, and you're right. I do look back at them with great affection, and sort of realised it was the end of one era, beginning of a new one, and with the advent of the Premier League and all that brought. The nature of the job changed quite dramatically. I was fortunate that by then I'd moved into TV. I was just very lucky in my career. All the moves that I made. I started in Birmingham and I came back to work in the Northeast, which is where I met my wife on the Journal, and then I got out of newspapers just when they were shrinking. I got into TV. I left ITV just when Tyne Tees was shrinking, and finished up at the BBC. I was just really lucky with the career choices that I made.
Yeah, I mean, Martin, I'm glad Jeff's with us and saying those things, because normally it's us two going, those were the days, and you know, glory days, and there's some young and on with us going, yeah, right, whatever, you know,
granddad, yeah.
But but when you look at the 90s and what the three clubs went to, all right, you know, we're a Sunderland podcast, but all three clubs went completely transformed during that decade. I mean, they might find themselves back in the same position now when you look back to probably what it was, or well, certainly Middlesbrough and Sunderland. But yeah, I mean, just a decade of everything seemed to be happening, you know, year on year. I mean, maybe a slow start for Sunderland's point of view, other than the cup final, but the whole decade, I mean, going through, I mean, it was my teens, so I was probably a bit younger than you, Martin, like we've established. But yeah, I mean, you know, everything just kind of blew up in the 90s.
Yeah, it looked for a little while like we might be left behind, didn't it? Because you know, Middlesbrough had taken off. Obviously, Keegan at Newcastle kind of changed the landscape of Northeast football forever, really, with everything that transpired after that with John Hall. But I think it was always a relief when we actually got the ground, because St James's Park was being redeveloped. Obviously, Middlesbrough had Ayresome Park. They had to leave there, got into Riverside, and there'd been talk, hadn't there, for quite a long time through the early 90s about us going over to Nissan, which obviously never transpired. But to actually get the ground and get it up and running, actually see it, because you know, I don't think anybody really. In your heart, you didn't want to leave Roker Park, but you knew in your head that it needed to happen for the club to progress. And I remember going down to the ground before the Ajax game, and I'd been, because I was at university at the time, so whenever I came back up, I used to go and take a whole series of photos of the new ground being put up, so I could have a whole collection of, you know, every 6 weeks or something. Here's a whole set of photographs, which I've still got. But the Ajax game was the first time that, you know, people were going to be in the ground to see it happening. And me and my mate Neil went down the day before. We drove down just to have a look around, just kind of get a feeling of the ground before you actually set foot in it for a proper game the next day. And the amount of work that was still going on 24 hours before the game was going to kick off was monumental. And you're going, there is never going to be a football match played here tomorrow, because there was, you know, people carrying things and, you know, hundreds of people in hard hats going about the place. And we were stood at one of the turnstiles on the east stand, which was slightly open, kind of having a look. And there was a few people sort of milling around. And some bloke opened one of the turnstiles, and we kind of having a look, see the pitch. He goes, "Are you here for the induction?" So we just went, "Yeah." So we got in and sat in the east stand with a group of other people. And we were talking through how to pull beers, how to serve things, because obviously they were inducting all of the staff for the bars. We didn't have any intention or clue about working in the bar. We just wanted to see the ground. So we got about an hour and a half's induction into the workings of all the kiosks in the Stadium Light. But we got our first glimpse of actually sitting in there before a lot of other people did. But it felt a massive step for the club. And, you're talking about, going back to the start of the conversation with, Jeff reporting on that and recording it for history. It's not even a once in a lifetime thing. It's a once in a century plus occurrence, isn't it? And, there'll be lots of people who don't actually, you're talking about other people who we get in the podcast who are part of Roker Report. It always shocks me that probably the majority of these people never stood it in the Fulwell End, never actually set foot in Roker Park. And you go, how is that possible? And you go, well, shit, yeah, it was 30 years ago or something. But it still shocks me that Sunderland supporters didn't get to go to Roker Park, because in my mind, the Stadium Light's still a fairly new ground. But obviously, it's not quite as new as it once was.
Yeah. And just like people will be doing that. I mean, we do like I said, the On This Day pieces, and we go back to, I try to write one about the clock stand being built in the 30s. Yeah. And I was taking bits from kind of the Echo that day, and so like I said, your pieces will live on. And we've mentioned some huge characters, and one of the things that I saw you talking about a lot was when you had a long chat with Brian Clough, Jeff.
Yes, I made a series called I made about four series, I think, maybe 5 hours, called Football Flashback with Tyne Tees, and it was basically a football archive series. I mean, the first thing I did when I joined Tyne Tees in 1996, I got the key to the cupboards downstairs, the library, and dusted off old footage. And I remember being heartbroken when I realised that old copies of Shoot, which for the younger viewers was at Tyne Tees' Sunday afternoon regional football match, didn't exist. They were all done live, so the studio inserts didn't exist, and the games had been filmed on sort of big 1-inch films, so these huge canisters, and a decision had been taken sometime in the 70s that it would, who would ever want to watch old football matches again? This is just taking up space. Chuck them all out. Fortunately, a lot of the goals had been clipped out, so while the matches themselves didn't exist, a lot of the goals did. So we had all his archive footage, and we Roger Thames did the studio bit and had a couple of guests in, and I had to go off and interview an old player for every episode, and we decided we'd write to Brian Clough. And he, thinking there's no way he's going to do this, and he wrote back and said, I get lots of requests, and I turned them all down, but because it's you, because it's Tyne Tees, I'll do it. So we went down, and I sat opposite him, and he talked at me for an hour and a half. And even though a lot of the stories I'd heard, some I hadn't, but a lot of them I had. But I'm sitting there thinking, this is Brian Clough. He's sitting there talking to me. And I've got the on an old VHS tape. I've got a copy of the Rushes, they call them, which is the raw footage. So I've got this hour and a half interview, and it was amazing. I mean, Clough had been my dad's hero, and obviously I'd followed him with great interest all my life, and suddenly to be standing there, sitting there chatting to him, and he spoke with great affection about Sunderland. Sunderland was, even though he was born and brought up in Middlesbrough and that was his club, he said he couldn't really understand when he joined Sunderland. He had mates saying, "You're joining the enemy," and he said he never got it. That there was something he shouldn't do, and it was just said it was the best time of his footballing life. Shame he never came back as manager, but there you go.
Yeah, one that got away, one of the many that got away. And I was looking again, because the Brian Clough one was a huge one, but I was also surprised to read when you were talking about some of the biggest stories you did, that actually you went back to Durham County Cricket Club, starting off as one of the biggest things that you reported on.
Yeah. I was. I did when I came back to the Journal in '96. I became the cricket writer, and used to cover all Durham and Northumberland's minor counties games. And and then followed them on at the first class game, so I got wind of the story with Ian Murter. We both sort of knew that this was brewing, Durham's bid for first class status, and we were both covering a Darlington football match at Feetham's one day, and this reporter from the Independent was there and came over and said, "What's this about Durham going first class cricket?" And we looked at each other and went, "Nah, absolute rubbish. Never going to happen." No. And as soon as he walked away, we went, "Oh, we got to run this story. We can't be scooped." So we wrote it up on the Sunday and for the Monday paper, and we both jointly broke, him for the Northern Echo, me for the Journal, broke this story about Durham making this bid to be the first minor county in 75 years to move up into the first class game, and all the Durham board immediately vowed never to talk to us again. Matty Rosebery, who was Mike Rosebery's dad, rang and gave me a real ear bashing. Said, "You've blown it now. Never going to happen because you've jumped the gun." But it did, and I went on for the next 5 years. I became from 92 to 96. I did 5 seasons as a cricket writer, mainly only going back to football in the winter, and that was just fabulous. 5 years of being out all summer, following cricket. It was, loved it. And when people say, "What's your favourite sporting memory?" Things you've covered, probably, although there've been some great football occasions, but Durham winning the Friends Provident Trophy in 2007 was just unbelievable. Really, I'd watched them as a kid, as a teenager, when there were 2 men and a dog. At Durham City or at Hartlepool or at Ashbrook. And then there's my team at Lords, the home of world cricket. And there was probably about 70% of the crowd were from the northeast, and not just wearing Sunderland shirts, wearing Newcastle shirts and Middlesbrough shirts. And it was just a fantastic occasion to think, wow, there's my team winning a national trophy.
Yeah. Sounds like a hard life, Jeff. Traveling all around the world to cricket in the summer. But you just mentioned there's something about reporting in the northeast, and would you think the northeast's kind of unique in that way that that everyone knows somebody? That fella just came up to you and went, "Oh, have you heard about this?" Because he probably overheard it in the pub, or he's speaking to his mate who had a mate who had a mate. I mean, do you think the northeast's a bit like that compared to most other areas of the country?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I've been all over the country, even on big hotspots for sport like Merseyside and London. There's nothing to compare with the northeast. The intensity with which we all follow our football clubs and our sport. It's just we are quite remote. We're a little bit further away from the action, and it's great, and that's why being a sports reporter up here was and still is. It's a great life, really, because everyone is interested. Even people who don't take interest in football know about football. Will have some sort of opinion on it. But look north. When I think I'm right in saying we are still the only BBC region that has sport on every night of the week. Everyone else just has it on if there's something happening. On a Monday they'll have a roundup, and on Friday they'll have a preview, and they might have something in midweek. But we're the only BBC regional station that has a dedicated sports slot every night because there's an appetite for it.
Yeah. You mentioned that the Durham cricket story was probably the biggest one, but was there a specific football one that you broke that you think, that was the biggest football one that I got a scoop on?
Probably Sunderland leaving Roker Park. I'm pretty sure I can claim that I broke that one. Because I'm trying to think what game it was. It was a pre-season friendly. I think it was the one where Kevin Ball made his debut. So the first ahead of the 1990-91 Division 1 season, and I had a word with Bob Murray before the match, and it was at the time when people were talking about new grounds and about regulation coming in for all-seater stadium, and he said, "Yeah, I think we're going to have to leave Roker Park." And I thought, "Whoa, that's a big story. And the other one again was a cricket one, was pre-season, Durham's second season, when Durham had a pre-season protocol in their first season. Ian Botham was there, and the world's press were there. It was just absolutely crazy. And the next season, there were about 4 of us. There was me, Doug Wetherall again, Tim Wellock, who was a cricket writer from the Northern Echo, and Tim Rich, who was a sports writer for the Sunderland Echo. And we were standing around, we said, who are we going to talk to? I might as well chat to Beefy. It's an old story, but we might as well have a word with him. And we said, gathered around, and we said, what about the new season, Ian? And he said, yeah, I'm looking forward to it, because it'll probably be my last. And we all just continued talking, and we all stopped writing in our notebooks and just went, sorry, I'm going to say, can you just go back? This is going to be, and he said, yeah, I think this is going to be my last season in cricket. Wow. Like Ian Botham, the biggest name in world cricket, possibly in England's history of cricket, apart from W.G. Grace, is going to retire. And I can remember sprinting to the phone box because there were no mobile phones. And at that stage, I was cricket writer for the Chronicle and the Journal and the Sunday Sun and the Pink, and ringing the Chronicle news desk and not quite saying hold the front page, but saying, hang on, you'll want to hear this. I was also there for, without making it a cricket podcast, I was there for every ball of Brian Lara's 501 against Durham in 1994. So another piece of cricket in history. I'd like to say I've seen all our teams win major football trophies, but sadly,
there's one that got away. Yeah.
Not yet.
And of course, Ian Botham, talked about Denis Smith and Ian Botham. Ian Botham used to train with Sunderland, and he used to come and play football with Denis Smith, I think, in pre-season, didn't he?
He did. He had a box. He had a box in at Roker Park for about a season, and again, I think Viv Busby told me this on the bus on the way back from a game that Ian Botham was going to come and train with them, and I put it in the paper the next day, and because of that, he didn't turn up, and so people were ringing me and saying, I thought he said Ian Botham. I said he was. He definitely was. I told you. But yeah, all the TV stations turned up, and so Beefy decided not to bother. Yeah. Sometimes stories don't work out.
That was around 88, 89, because we used to stand in the paddocks in the main stand towards the Fulwell end that season, and Ian Botham was in maybe the second or third box in from the Fulwell end.
Yeah, that's the one.
Pretty much every week.
So the opposite side to the Roker Rookies. So
that's right. Yeah, probably with good reason.
That's it. I was going to say the noise that came from there. I mean, just the last one on kind of the journalism side, Jeff, because I know this is a bit of a bugbear for Martin, because we quite often talk about obviously this era, and one of the biggest ones was the Bill Bradshaw story in 1990, where he kind of went for what Swindon were doing, and he was getting information, and he was investigating it. I mean, do you think because of the way things have changed, we've lost that type of journalist?
Yeah, yes. Everyone wants the news now, and the long form investigative stuff. And also there's not quite the platform for it now. You never quite know. You can break a big story, and it can just disappear. It can not get picked up by somebody else. Newspapers used to feed off other newspapers, and yeah, the investigative stuff just doesn't seem to happen as much now. I think it would be interesting to find. I'm sure there's a lot going on behind the scenes at Sunderland. Where does Kirrell's money come from? Well, that would be interesting for someone to not that I want to go too deeply into it, but and they're just raising money put the ground up as collateral on a loan. Yeah. Be interesting for someone to find out who the loans, who's. Yeah. Anyway, I'll go no further.
No, but you're all right. But that's a good segue into the kind of modern day, because me and Martin could sit here all day, I think, and talk about those times. But Kirill Louis-Dreyfus, we've mentioned, and we talked to him a little bit. For about 3 years now, he's owned the club. Mostly been ups. There's been a couple of false starts. But in terms of how he's working, there seems to be a plan. And, we talked to Kieran Maguire, football finance expert, and he described it as, these clubs who carry on with a plan and ignore what he described as the outside noise. But how do you make of the way they've kind of built over the last few years?
Yeah, you can't knock it, can you? I mean, at the start of the season, I got asked by a filmmaker called Harry Lawson to he was doing a promo for Sky, and he said, in one word, sum up your hopes for the season. and I said, survival, based on the way they finished last season and the way things are going. So who would ever have dreamed that with 5 games to go, 17 points clear of 7th place, guaranteed playoffs. When the season started, the first game, I was sitting with Simon O'Rourke from Tyne Tees, and he said, Rashid Slabreeze, we're either going to be saying in 5 years' time, wasn't he an absolutely amazing guy to come in? Or we're going to be saying, do you remember that French guy who was here for about 3 weeks? And at the moment, you're going to be saying, wow, where did he come from? I mean, what's his third season in senior management, or coaching in charge of a senior team? So, hey, fair play to whoever chose him and the way things are going. Obviously, this summer is going to be a huge one, isn't it? Depending on which division the team's in, and we'll probably decide which place, which of the richly talented youngsters are still coming back next season. And it's a tricky one. It is, but for where they are and for where the club had been, some decisions still slightly baffle me. Tony Mowbray, I thought, was a great fit for the club, an absolutely super guy. Mike Beale, where is he now? Whatever happened?
Don't think he's got a job, has he?
No. Whatever happened there? Who decided that was a good idea? But somehow, here we are, heading for the playoffs.
Yeah. I mean, Martin, I'm glad Jeff said that. We haven't paid Jeff to say these things, but sometimes, Martin, I feel like, it's just us kind of saying this because, sometimes I feel like the job he's done's been underestimated because we're so desperate for those automatics, but he's virtually done it with the same squad.
Well, he has, and he's been obviously chosen to do that, hasn't he? He's been brought. I think they've learned from mistakes that they made in the past, and Tony Mowbray was great as a manager for Sunderland, and I don't think they should have sacked him when they did. But he's obviously used to being a manager. He's an old school manager, and I think he kind of struggled with that head coach type of role. So what they've done with the Briss is kind of what they tried to do with Beale, which is completely the wrong person, where they went for somebody who's a coach rather than an old school manager, somebody who's used to working with youth and bring them through and developing them and coaching them. But as Jeff rightly says, nobody could have had any confidence that it was going to go one way or the other. It was a complete shot in the dark for, I think, every Sunderland supporter. And unless you were really following his career over the past 10 years, and obviously seeing how it went over the last couple when he had a sort of head coach role, he couldn't make any sort of educated decision about whether he was going to be the right person or the wrong person. But I think going back to completely the present day, the game against Norwich, awful game to watch for the vast majority of it. But you can kind of see the structure that he has brought in and the way he's got them playing as a team, as opposed to a group of talented individuals, which I think to some extent Tony Mowbray was a little bit guilty of. He was kind of, go and give the ball to these talented players and let them work some magic. Give the ball to Jack Clark, give the ball to Patrick Roberts, we'll score. Give the ball to Ahmad.
Give it a Waddler.
Give it a Waddler. And So you've got that really good structure. We had Phil Smith on, who was another really good football journo in the present day. We had him on the pod on Sunday, and he was saying, a lot of the success that we've enjoyed with Labris this season, it's also been some of the negative stuff as well. So you kind of take the structure and say, well, you'll grind out a point in Norwich, but in some games it might have held us back a little bit. We're not going all out with tackle. We're not finishing games off. So there's all these bits to consider. But you come back to the position that we're in, the season that we have, and some people will go, "Oh yes, but if we'd held on against Millwall and we'd done this and done that, we would get." But every single club in the world could say the same thing, and every single club in the world would win every game. Like there's always little moments in games that decide it one way or the other, and I think for us to be in the position we're in after the season that we had in the second half of last season, because that's a big bit of the impressive stuff that Labris has done, because he hasn't come into a team that finished the season last year highly and you had to continue that. He had to pick a team up that was probably quite despondent, probably wondering what the hell was going on around the club in terms of managerial appointments, all that sort of stuff. Thinking, who the hell is this bloke coming in? Because we've never heard or seen him before. And, you've got all these talented players who he's had to win over to get them playing in a system, in the formation and, a strategy that's going to actually get success. And if you look at the starting 11, we haven't got a very deep squad. And the vast majority of people who were here last season, there hasn't been a great deal of turnover in the squad. Players have come through and players got more experience and developed and all that sort of stuff. And, I know social, again, this is kind of going back to our, feel like the Muppets, don't we? But, you're going back to social media. It was a Hull game that we lost after Leeds, wasn't it?
Yes.
It was Hull, wasn't it? And you're reading on social media, should sack Labris. He's not going to get us anywhere, even if and you're thinking, what planet are you on? There's any single manager you get, there's always going to be something where you go, I'd prefer it if he did a little bit more of that, or prefer if he picked that player, or prefer if he gave that guy more of a chance. But if you take a step back and you look at what he's done, I pulled the stat out last week on the pod, because I went through the win. I think, what was it? Any Sunderland manager who's managed more than 30 games. So I was like, that's it prevents a caretaker from winning 4 out of 5 or whatever. Labris has got the best win percentage of any manager who's managed 30 games or more in the top 2 divisions since Tom Watson in the late 1890s. Right? So if you take that as, and you look, there's, lies, damn lies and statistics, isn't it? But you can kind of take that as a little bit of a litmus test of the job he's done. Even
in a very competitive division as well.
But a hugely competitive division. You look at the teams above us, all the teams with parachute payments, and you can argue the rights and wrongs about the way that the club's going about things. But really, unless you've got somebody coming in who's going to pump a load of money in and never want it back again, because you can pump a load of money in, but one day a lot of these clubs will be in a position where whoever's pumped in wants a lot of it back. You've got to do what we're doing. And, I think there's a certain satisfaction in achieving what we've achieved this season by doing it that way. It would be dead easy. Well, you say dead easy, but we've tried it and failed magnificently before, haven't we? It would be relatively more straightforward to put in 80, 90, 100 million, say to the manager, you go and buy a few players and get us promoted. And yes, you'd enjoy the season. You'd have a bit of satisfaction out of that. But the way that we've done it this season, and who knows how it transpires and how it ends up. We could be all devastated or deliriously happy in a month or so's time. But as a fan, I get more satisfaction out of that. And you got players like Regan, Dan Neil and Patterson and all these players who've come from the youth team. You got Harrison Jones coming on last night. The bench had another 2 or 3 youngsters on. And the more that you see that happening, the more that you kind of enjoy, but you've got to enjoy the big picture. Because if you look at the microcosm of a single game or a missed chance or whatever, then you can get frustrated, can't you? But I just think they've set it up as a really, really attractive place for young players to play. And I think the better we get and the more evolved that we get on that, we're going to get a higher caliber of young player coming in to be developed. And I think that's a really exciting thing. If you were a kid, 16, 8-year-old, 9-year-old, 10-year-old in the Northeast now, and you had the choice of the 3 clubs, Sunderland's going to be fairly high up in that pecking order in terms of where you'd want to go to be developed, regardless of your allegiance, because chances are in 5 or 6 years' time, if you're good enough, you'll be on the bench or given first team minutes. So it's all shaping up pretty well, I think.
Yeah, just on that last point that Martin's made, Jeff, is that essentially the scenario that's playing out with Tommy Watson that's just been announced, and should we get more used to that happening?
Yeah, I think the club weren't very happy that the news came out. It did seem very odd that they should make it public. He's gone at the end of the season, but will still be playing. And I hope the fans get behind it, because hey, who knows what deal's involved, but it could turn out to be a fabulous deal. Getting up to 10 million for someone who's not played that many games. He looks like he could turn out to be a great player, but he might not. But this is what the club is. It's a selling club. It's a raising young lads and giving them the opportunities and put them in the shop window. Job's not going to be there forever. Chris Riggs not going to be there forever. But the good thing is that I've got a mate who's a scout for Derby County, the lad I went to university with, and I was chatting to him the other week, and he said among the scouts, they all say Sunderland under-21s are the best team to watch. That's where you spot the really good kids. Hopefully you're not going to pinch them all, but that augurs well for the future.
Yeah. And just on that, in terms of scouts, I mean, you mentioned Chris Rigg. He's been linked with, 30 million move to Tottenham. Joe Bellingham linked with Manchester United. Dan Neil, I think, has got a lot of Premier League clubs looking at him, watching him week in, week out. I mean, so how important is it that Sunderland are promoted? Because surely it's going to be difficult to keep this team together.
Yeah, it'll be impossible if promotion isn't won this season. And even though I'm sure every fan's thinking, go up, come straight back down. I mean, look at the 3 teams who were so good in the Championship last year, and look where they are this season in the Premier League. All he can hope to do is go up and then come down and then go back up again and try and hang on like, who would have thought the likes of Bournemouth and Brentford would be, and Nottingham Forest, who although they chose another way of doing it. But who would have thought that they could have survived? So, yeah, that's got to be the hope.
Yeah, and it doesn't happen very often with Sunderland, but 5 games to go, and we're pretty much sure of what's happening at the end of the season. And I suppose it did happen last season, but for a completely different reason. And we've got potentially something at the end of this. But how does Sunderland play out these last 5 games? Because I think you saw in the Norwich game a little bit of rotation, which people talked about, but until then, he's kind of, the manager kind of avoided it. So it'll be interesting to see what he does in these last 5 games. Yeah,
it's like a phony war, isn't it? They've 5 games that don't mean an awful lot, but the last thing, ultimately, when the playoffs start, could be 15 points ahead of whoever's in 5th, but counts for nothing. It's keeping that momentum going, and it is difficult because you don't want to pick up injuries, and you do want to make sure that fringe players are ready to step in. Remember in the Luton game how the defensive side of the squad had just disappeared. So those players have got to be. The fringe players have got to be ready to step up. And by and large, first half was pretty grim and conceded quite a lot of chances, but then held on. And when you suddenly see Roberts and Isidore and Lefebvre coming off the bench, and think, whoa, actually that's a big that's a big move. That. So yeah, they just got to try and keep keep ticking over and keep winning games. Easier said than done. And I suppose it's like when you're playing towards a cup final, isn't it? I'm sure players' minds are on, I'll save myself for the cup final. But it's, shame there's not just one game. Shame there's 5 to get through.
Yeah. And of course, at the end of it, playoffs could be interesting. Looking at some of the clubs, you've got one of the top 3. You've got Coventry. You've got the Tony Mowbray effect at West Brom, possibly Alex Neil, who is still just about sniffing around. And of course, Borough, which kind of, takes me back to, well, not quite that big, but playing Newcastle in 1990, because it would be the first time that I think 2 of the 3 big clubs are met in the playoffs since then.
Yeah, I remember that the Football League were absolutely dreading that it would turn out to be a Sunderland Newcastle final at Wembley, and managed to keep them 3rd and 6th. And I'm sure it's the same with Middlesbrough. Wouldn't fancy a Sunderland Leeds final at Wembley. I think that's been done before. That would be quite an interesting one. Yeah, Who would anyone prefer? I'm not really sure. Bristol City, Coventry, bit of a bogey team. Middlesbrough, when they're on form, can score a lot of goals. When they're not, they can be pretty ordinary. It's a look of the draw, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I'm still looking at Watford winning their last 5 games and sneaking in and then beating everyone. But are you already looking at packages to get across, Martin?
Not the last time. It's funny because I came over for the Checkatrade Trophy final, and Jeff, you actually interviewed me outside Wembley for a bit for the telly, and then obviously we got beat had a very good weekend, a long weekend in London. When we got to the playoff final against Wickham, I thought I'll do the same. Hopped on a plane, started feeling a little bit rough flying over Darwin, I think, and then got off the plane, did a COVID test, and I had COVID. So I spent a long weekend, well, a very long weekend on my parents' sofa and missed the game. So I shan't be tempting fate by doing that again. So I think I'll be watching it from the comfort of my own lounge this time around. But but you never say never, right? You never know what happens.
My mate was the beneficiary to take Martin's ticket, unfortunately. But just on that, Jeff, I mean, we spoke to Nick Barnes and Rob Mason. They've already got hotels booked. I mean, being out of the kind of that journalism kind of group, are you still looking at organising things like that?
Oh yes, I'd still be down for it. Although, which brings me nicely to my play, because my play, the bench, will have started then. It starts its month-long tour at the Gala Theatre in Durham on the Thursday, the 22nd, and it tours the North East and a couple of dates in Cumbria for a month. And I'd said, I'm going to be at all the shows. I'll be there. If you want to see the bloke who used to be on the telly, he'll be there as in person. And then I saw the playoff weekend, and I had to say at the Gala, actually, I might not be there on Saturday the 24th. Just warning you, because I might have somewhere else to go then.
Well, that's it. Well, since you've already mentioned it, because like you said, late May and into June, called The Bench. And I saw a quick description you gave to the Echo as being, on the surface, it's a boy meets girl story, but there's so much more beneath it. Themes of poverty, racism, and searching for your place in the world. But I'm sure you'll want to expand on that.
Yeah, so, blimey, The Bench. It was... it's the second play I've written. The first one was a monologue called Cornered, which was about Davy Corner and his experience in the what happened to him at Wembley, Milk Cup Final '85. This one, so that was a monologue. This one's more rounded. It's got 5 characters in it, but it's basically a boy meets. It's a black footballer who comes to play, who's born in Africa, raised in France, comes to play for an ailing Premier League team in the North East, which, when I started writing it, was Sunderland, although it's not mentioned. No, sorry. And he's struggling for game time, spends a lot of time on the substitutes bench, getting a lot of abuse on and off the pitch. But on a park bench, you see what I'm doing here? On a park bench, he meets a single mum on benefits who's also caring for her mother. And so there are a couple of lost souls. She's a lost soul with not much money, and he's a lost soul with a lot of money. So apparently they seem to be from different worlds, but actually they've got more in common than you think. It had a run of 4 nights, 6 shows at the Customs House in South Shields in September 23, and it got a better reaction than I could ever have dreamed of. And a lot of people who saw it said, you can't just end it here. You got to take it further. So it's taken 18 months, but we put together a month-long tour, going all the way around the northeast. It's from after the Gala, I think it goes to the Exchange in North Shields. We're doing Washington Arts Centre, live theatre in Newcastle, Queen's Hall in Hexham, Alnwick Playhouse, Middlesbrough Town Hall, Bishop Auckland Town Hall. It really is going all over the place. We're doing 30 shows in 31 days across 17 venues. So, and probably the biggest and best of all for me is that it's going to be at Monk Wearmouth School, Monk Wearmouth Academy. So I went there. I did an event there in November, a book launch for Terry Deary, who, like me, went to Monk Wearmouth. And the school hall had not changed since I left in 1979. However, it's since undergone a massive redevelopment, and they've turned it into a community theatre. And I think this is going to be the first big public event there. So June the 17th, if anyone lives in the Roker, Seaburn, Fulwell area, or Whitburn, or anywhere, get yourself a look. And ticket details are on the producer's website, which is Carol W Productions, Carol with an E, CAROLEW Productions.com.
Yeah.
That's my plug. Thank you very much.
That's it. You took the words out of my mouth for that, because I had the website right here, and it got all the tour dates, and it's got the ticket details on there. So I hope that should be a good 4 or 5 weeks for you, Jeff. 4 or 5 weeks of celebration. Let's hope on that one.
Fingers crossed, eh?
Yeah, thank you.
And just quickly as well, I mentioned in the intro as well, you're doing BBC Sounds interviews. I've seen you've had the likes of Alan Shearer, Gary Bennett on there.
Yes, did a BBC podcast series called Jeff Brown's Sporting Greats, which sort of does what it says on the tin. And it was great. I really enjoyed it. Yes, apart from Benno and Alan Shearer, it's Glenn McCrory, Savannah Marshall, the Hartlepool boxer, Katie McLean, who is from South Shields and was a primary school teacher in Sunderland when she was England captain when they won the Women's Rugby World Cup. Stephen Miller, the Paralympian. Steve Harmison, who's a top guy, and Brendan Foster. And hopefully, it's all that's on BBC Sounds, and we're hoping to launch a second series later in the year. So I'm fairly busy. In fact, I'm busier than I was. Feels busier than I was when I was working.
Yeah, well, I was going to mention as well, you were made Pro Chancellor of Sunderland University as well last year.
No, this year it's coming up. Yeah, it's in July. I'm going to be Pro Chancellor, which I wish my mum and dad had been around to see it. Just a real honour, and something I'm very passionate about. Sunderland University, I think, it's just done so much for the city in terms of diversity and learning as well. I think Sunderland's got one of, if not the highest number of local students in the university, which is great.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you see, everyone will listen to this. Everyone think you've been putting your feet up for a year, whereas actually you've been working hard.
Busy lad.
So there you go. I mean, hopefully it should be an enjoyable May and June with the lads, hopefully smashing it in the playoffs, and your play doing the same on stage, Jeff. So that's a nice place to finish off. And that just leaves me to say thank you very much, Martin. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, mate.
And thanks again, Jeff. We really appreciate your time, and hopefully we'll catch up soon. Maybe previewing playoffs, or maybe in Trafalgar Square, or who knows.
That would be nice. Thanks very much.
It would be nice. Cheers, Jeff. And thanks again, everyone, for listening. We've got loads of pods we've just released, and we have plenty more on the way. So you'll need to like or subscribe or whatever it is, because I never know how those things work. But you'll need all of that to keep up. And you can always look out on the Roker Report site for all the latest. But from us, it's bye for now.
Excellent.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.